The black maid told the Mafia boss, "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." What? Amara Williams stood quietly in the grand kitchen of the Romano mansion, the clinking of silverware and the distant murmur of voices in the dining room barely reaching her ears. As she worked, her mind wandered. The mansion was elegant, with marble floors and intricate chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. It was a world so different from the one she had grown up in. But here she was, a black maid, making her way through the day in silence, as she had done for the past few years. But today was different. Today, something had shifted. As she entered the living room with a tray of drinks, her eyes fell upon Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss she worked for. He was standing near the window, his tall figure almost blending into the shadows of the room, his presence commanding and undeniable. Amara hesitated for a moment, holding her breath as he turned his head slightly, catching her gaze. There was an intensity in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. She quickly looked away, placing the tray down on the coffee table and retreating to the corner of the room. But her heart was racing, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That's when she noticed it. Just as she was about to turn away, Dominic reached up, rolling up his sleeve slightly, revealing a tattoo on his arm. It was a simple design, but one that immediately caught her attention. She froze. It was the same tattoo her mother had, the one she had seen countless times as a child. It was a symbol that had always held meaning, a connection to something deeper, something unknown. Her mother had always kept the story behind the tattoo a secret, never revealing its true significance. But now, standing before Dominic Romano, it felt like a puzzle piece falling into place. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours," Amara blurted out before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was trying to process what she had just said. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Amara's heart was pounding in her chest. She knew she had said something unexpected, something that had caught him off guard, but she had no idea what it would mean for her. "What did you say?" Dominic's voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it that made Amara's throat tighten. She didn't know what to do. She had never seen him this close before, his presence almost overwhelming. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. Amara swallowed hard, her mind racing. "My mother, she had the same tattoo. I don't know how, but it's the same." Dominic stared at her, his face impassive. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had stopped. Amara wanted to explain more, to tell him everything, but she couldn't. She didn't know what this meant, what it could mean for her mother. She had no answers. Just questions. "Where is your mother now?" Dominic asked, his voice steady but with an edge of curiosity. Amara's heart skipped a beat. She had never spoken about her mother's past to anyone, let alone to the Mafia boss. It felt like she was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something she didn't fully understand. But she couldn't stop herself from answering. "She's gone," she whispered. Dominic didn't respond immediately, but the look in his eyes softened ever so slightly. He studied her for a moment longer before nodding and turning away. "You should rest for the night," he said, his voice almost gentle now. Amara nodded, still in a daze. As she left the room, she couldn't help but feel that she had just opened a door to something she wasn't ready to face. Amara's heart raced as she retreated from the room, the weight of her words hanging in the air. What had she done? She barely knew the man, the Mafia boss, Dominic Romano, and now she had made a connection between him and her mother, a connection that felt both familiar and unsettling. She walked down the long, cold hallway of the mansion, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The grandeur of the mansion was both beautiful and overwhelming, a world so far removed from the humble life she had known. She had worked for the Romanos for years, cleaning their grand rooms, serving their guests, but she had never felt a connection to them, not until now. As Amara passed by the polished, gilded mirrors lining the hallway, she caught her reflection. Her skin, the color of rich mahogany, stood out against the backdrop of luxury, making her feel more like a shadow in this world. She had always kept to herself, never questioning her place. But now, with that one simple remark, she had opened a door to something she could not yet understand. The tattoo, her mother's tattoo, the same one Dominic had, was no coincidence. But how? Why? She couldn't shake the image of Dominic's eyes when he looked at her, the brief flicker of surprise, of recognition, before he regained his composure. What did he know? What was this all connected to? She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was just a mistake, that she had said something she shouldn't have. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She felt the pull of a long-forgotten past, the memory of her mother's stories, the ones she had always avoided asking about. Her mother had been secretive, mysterious even, and now Amara wondered if she had kept things from her for a reason. Why did she hide that tattoo from her? Why had she never spoken about it? It was a mystery that had plagued Amara for years, one that she had never dared to uncover. But now, it felt like that mystery was coming to find her. She reached her small room, the one tucked away in the back of the mansion where the staff lived. It was nothing special, but it was hers. It had become her sanctuary from the world she had always kept at a distance. She closed the door behind her and sank down onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced. What did Dominic know? What was his connection to her mother? She had always known there was something more to her past, but now it felt like the threads of that past were starting to unravel, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what might be revealed. The next day, as she went about her usual duties, the weight of the previous night's conversation still hung over her. Every time she passed Dominic, she couldn't help but feel his gaze on her. There was something different in the way he looked at her, something that made her feel exposed. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, more personal. She couldn't escape the feeling that he knew something she didn't, something that tied them together in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. As the day wore on, Amara found herself struggling to focus on her work. She kept replaying the moment over and over in her mind, wondering if she had made a mistake by speaking up. But she couldn't undo what had been said. She couldn't take back the words. It was then that she saw him again, standing in the doorway of the study. Dominic was talking to a group of his associates, his back turned to her as he discussed something with them. The conversation paused when he noticed her standing there, and for a split second, their eyes met. The air seemed to thicken between them. He didn't speak, but his stare was intense, probing, as if he was waiting for something from her. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly dropped her gaze and continued walking, trying to ignore the feeling that was gnawing at her. But as she passed, she heard him speak, his voice low but clear. "We need to talk." The words stopped her in her tracks. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Was this it? Was this the moment where everything would come crashing down? She felt a mixture of fear and curiosity flood her veins, unsure of what to expect, but knowing that she couldn't avoid whatever was coming. Dominic gestured for her to approach, his expression unreadable. Amara hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked toward him. She had no idea what this conversation would bring, but she knew it was a turning point, a moment that could change everything. She stopped a few steps away from him, waiting for him to speak. "Tell me more about your mother," Dominic said, his voice softer now, but with an edge of something she couldn't place. The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, she struggled to find her voice. What was he asking? Why was he suddenly so interested in her mother? Amara swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She had always avoided discussing her mother's past, but now it seemed like there was no escaping it. She had a tattoo, Amara said quietly, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. But it's nothing, just a symbol. Dominic's eyes narrowed, and she could see the wheels turning in his mind. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "What kind of symbol?" he asked, his tone calm, but there was a sharpness to it. Amara hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. What did he really want to know? It was a design, something small, but it meant a lot to her. "She never told me what it really was." She paused, looking up at him. "But you have the same one. Why?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back and crossed his arms, his gaze never leaving hers. The silence between them grew heavy, but Amara couldn't look away. She had no idea what he would say next, but she could feel the tension building, and she knew that this conversation would lead them to a truth neither of them was ready to face. The silence between Amara and Dominic stretched out, thick with unspoken words and unasked questions. The air felt heavy, and Amara's heart raced in her chest as she waited for him to respond. She had no idea what had driven her to speak up, to reveal something so personal, so private about her mother, especially to a man like Dominic. But now that the words were out there, she couldn't take them back. She could only wait, uncertain of what this would mean for her. For them. Dominic stood motionless, his eyes locked on hers as if he were searching for something she couldn't see. She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, wondering if she had just made a mistake, if her curiosity had led her into dangerous waters. "You're avoiding the question," Dominic said finally, his voice low but firm. His words cut through the tension, and Amara blinked, momentarily taken aback. "What kind of symbol was it?" he asked again, his gaze unwavering. Amara swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry, and her mouth was suddenly too small for the words she wanted to say. She had never shared her mother's secret with anyone, not even with her closest friends. But standing there in front of Dominic, she couldn't help but feel that the past was closing in on her, that the truth she had kept buried for so long was finally coming to the surface. "I don't know exactly," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She never really told me about it. But it was important to her. I could tell." Dominic's eyes softened for just a moment, a flicker of something that almost looked like understanding. But then he turned away, pacing slowly toward the window. The light outside was dimming, the sky turning a deep shade of blue as night approached. He stood there for a long time, staring out at the horizon, lost in thought. Amara watched him, unsure of what was happening between them. There was a distance in his posture, a coldness that seemed to push her away even as his presence pulled her in. She wanted to leave, to escape the growing tension that she could feel in the pit of her stomach. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the way Dominic carried himself, the way his power seemed to seep into every corner of the room. Or maybe it was the way he had looked at her, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle, as if he were trying to figure out who she really was. "Do you know what the tattoo means?" Dominic asked, his voice breaking through the stillness. His back was still turned to her, but she could hear the weight of his words, the quiet urgency in them. Amara hesitated. She had never really known what the tattoo meant. It was a mystery her mother had never shared with her, and now that mystery was turning into something far more complicated. "No," Amara replied, shaking her head. "She never explained it to me, but she always said it was part of her past, something she couldn't forget." Dominic turned to face her then, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, something calculating, something dangerous, that made Amara take a step back. She didn't know what he was thinking, but she had the distinct feeling that he knew far more than he was letting on. "And you think it has something to do with me?" he asked, his tone sharp, probing. Amara's heart skipped a beat. The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to answer. The idea that her mother's past could be connected to Dominic's, his power, his family, his world, was a thought she had never entertained. But now, standing here, in this moment, it felt like a truth she couldn't ignore. "I don't know," Amara admitted, her voice trembling. "But there's something about the tattoo, something that makes me think our paths crossed before." Dominic's gaze never left her, his expression cold but intense. "How would you know that?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. Amara hesitated again, unsure of how much to reveal. But the truth was there, swirling in her mind, threatening to spill out. "I don't know how," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I feel it. I feel like there's more to this story than I realize. More than I can understand." Dominic stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. Amara's breath caught in her throat as he stood just inches away from her. She could feel the heat of his body, the tension in the air, and she realized that this moment was far more than she had bargained for. "You're not the only one with secrets," Dominic said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "We all have things we hide, things we try to forget." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Amara felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. What was he saying? What was he trying to tell her? She opened her mouth to speak, but Dominic raised a hand to stop her. "I know more than you think," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "And I think it's time you learned the truth." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure if she was ready to learn whatever Dominic was about to reveal, but she knew she didn't have a choice. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and she was standing on the edge of it. Dominic's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Amara could feel the weight of them pressing down on her, her chest tight, her mind racing. She wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. The truth. What truth was he talking about? Her heart was pounding in her ears, and for the first time, she realized how little she knew about the man standing in front of her. He was a mafia boss, a figure of power and fear, yet in this moment, his gaze softened, almost as if he were inviting her into a world she was not prepared for. The truth is a dangerous thing, Amara, Dominic said, his voice low, almost reflective. Once you start uncovering it, there's no going back. Amara swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. She had always known there was more to her mother's past than she had been told. But now, standing here, facing Dominic, she realized that the truth she was about to uncover could unravel everything. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but at the same time, she couldn't walk away. Something deep inside her pushed her forward. What are you trying to say? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked toward the large desk at the center of the room, his footsteps heavy on the polished wood floor. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, worn envelope. He held it in his hands for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind, before turning back to her. This was your mother's, he said, his voice steady. Yet there was an undercurrent of something more, something that made Amara's heart race even faster. He walked over and handed her the envelope, his fingers brushing against hers. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she took it from him. The envelope was old, its edges frayed, and the writing on the front was smudged, as if it had been handled many times before. She recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. What is this? Amara asked, her voice trembling. Open it, Dominic urged, his tone soft but firm. Amara slowly slid her finger along the edge of the envelope, tearing it open. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. She unfolded it carefully, her fingers shaking. The words on the page were written in her mother's neat handwriting, but they didn't make sense. To my daughter, Amara, the letter began. The truth about our past is something you must find on your own. I've kept it hidden for years, and now it's time for you to learn the truth. Be careful, though. Some truths are better left forgotten. Amara's mind whirled as she read the letter. What was her mother trying to tell her? And why had she kept this secret from her? Her gaze lifted from the letter to Dominic, who was watching her closely. This letter is your mother's confession, he said quietly. She was part of something much bigger than you realized. A part of my world, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Amara's head spun as she tried to process his words. Her mother, involved in Dominic's world? How is that even possible? What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic walked over to the window and looked out, his posture stiff, as if he were preparing to say something difficult. Your mother was connected to my family, he said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of the truth. Not in the way you might think, but in a way that changed everything for both of us. Amara felt her breath catch in her throat. Her mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Her mother, involved with Dominic's family? It didn't seem possible. Her mother had always been so ordinary, so humble. But now, standing here, facing Dominic, she realized that the past was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. What does this have to do with me? Amara asked, her voice breaking. Dominic turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Your mother's past is a part of who you are, he said. And now it's time for you to know the truth. He paused, studying her for a moment. There's more at stake here than you realize. You're not just a maid in my house, Amara. You're tied to this in ways you can't yet understand. Amara felt her world shift beneath her feet. The truth was slipping through her fingers, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to grasp it. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling. Dominic stepped closer to her, his gaze intense. I need you to understand, Amara, he said, his voice low and urgent. Your mother's connection to my family isn't something that can be erased. It's a part of you, and it's a part of me. You need to accept that, because everything you thought you knew about your life is about to change. Amara's mind raced, her thoughts spinning out of control. What was Dominic saying? And how did this all tie into her mother's past? She had no answers, only questions. And now, it seemed, those questions were leading her into a world she wasn't prepared to face. Amara's heart hammered in her chest. As she stood in the silence of the room, her mind reeling from the truth that Dominic had just revealed. His words echoed in her head, over and over. Your mother's past is a part of you. The weight of that statement pressed down on her, crushing her under its intensity. What did he mean? How could her mother's secrets be tied to Dominic's world? Her mother had always been just a simple woman, living a quiet life, away from the shadows of crime and danger that surrounded Dominic. But now, standing in front of him, Amara was beginning to realize that there was so much more to her mother's life than she had ever known. She had always been proud of her mother, proud of the way she had raised her alone, working hard to provide for them both. She had never once suspected that her mother had a past filled with secrets, let alone one connected to the Mafia. As the silence stretched on, Amara glanced at Dominic, whose gaze remained fixed on her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain intensity in his eyes that made her skin prickle. He was waiting for her to say something, waiting for her to ask the questions that were swirling in her mind. But Amara couldn't bring herself to speak. What could she ask? How could she possibly understand the depth of what he was saying? I know this is a lot to take in, Dominic said after a moment, his voice low but firm. But you need to understand, Amara. Your mother's connection to my family is not something that can be erased. It's not something you can ignore. It's a part of who you are. Amara's head swam with confusion. She had never felt so lost in her life. She had thought she knew who she was, what her life meant, but now everything was turning upside down. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice shaking. Why didn't she ever tell me about this? Why did she keep it hidden? Dominic took a step closer to her, his presence overwhelming. Because she knew the danger it would bring, he said quietly. She didn't want you to be involved in this world, Amara. She wanted to protect you from it. But the truth is, you can't escape your past. It's in your blood, in your bones. Amara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The truth was too much to bear, too heavy to hold. She had always believed that her mother had given her a safe, simple life, away from the chaos and violence of the world. But now, that illusion was shattered. She was part of a world she didn't understand, a world that seemed as dangerous as it was powerful. What do you want from me? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening just a fraction. I want you to understand, he said. I want you to know what you're a part of. You can't hide from this anymore, Amara. It's time to face the truth. Amara's mind was racing, but one thing was clear. She couldn't keep running from this. She couldn't pretend anymore. The truth had found her, and there was no escaping it. What do you mean by it's in your blood? She asked, her voice trembling. Dominic's gaze hardened, and for a moment, he seemed almost like a different person. Your mother wasn't just some innocent woman, Amara, he said, his voice growing colder. She was part of a network, a group that worked alongside my family. She knew things that you don't even realize. Amara's breath caught in her throat. What things? She asked, her voice a little stronger now. Dominic paused, as if weighing his words. Things about my family, about the business we run, he said finally. Your mother was involved in a way you can't imagine. But I won't go into details. Not yet. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. This was more than she could have ever imagined. Her mother, part of the Mafia? It didn't make sense. She wanted to deny it, to believe that Dominic was wrong. But deep down, she knew he wasn't. She had always wondered about her mother's past, about the secrets she kept. But this was a reality that was hard to accept. Why are you telling me this now? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's expression softened, but his eyes remained hard. Because it's time for you to know, he said. You're a part of this now, Amara, whether you like it or not. And you need to understand what that means. Amara felt her knees go weak, and, for a moment, she thought she might collapse. The room felt like it was closing in on her. She had always thought she knew who she was, but now she was faced with the truth. She was connected to something far bigger, far more dangerous, than she could ever have imagined. I don't know if I can do this, Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can be a part of this world. Dominic stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming. You don't have a choice, he said softly. This is your legacy, Amara. You can't change it, but you can decide what you do with it. The weight of his words settled over her, and she realized that this was the moment that would change everything. She could either accept the truth and face the consequences, or she could run, but running wouldn't erase the past. It wouldn't change who she was. So what now? she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his eyes studying her face. Now, you learn who you really are. Amara stood in the silence of the room, her heart still racing from everything Dominic had just revealed. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, trying to make sense of the information she had just learned. Her mother, a part of the Mafia? It didn't seem real, but deep down, she knew Dominic was telling the truth. The words echoed in her mind. Your mother was involved in a way you can't imagine. What did that mean for her? What did that mean for her life moving forward? She had always been so sure of who she was, just a maid, doing her job, trying to stay out of the way. But now, she was being told that she was tied to something much darker, something far beyond her understanding. As the silence stretched on, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. So, what am I supposed to do now? Dominic didn't immediately respond. He stood there, his presence filling the room, as if he were weighing her words, deciding how much to reveal. After a long moment, he stepped closer to her, his gaze never leaving hers. You start by understanding who you really are, Amara, he said quietly. His words were like a weight in the air, heavy with meaning. You're more than just a maid in this house. You have a legacy, a history that's been hidden from you. But now, it's time for you to face it. Amara's mind spun as she processed his words. A legacy? She repeated, the word unfamiliar on her lips. What does that even mean? Dominic's expression softened slightly, but there was still an air of caution in his gaze. It means you're connected to this world, whether you like it or not, he said. You can't change that, Amara. But you can decide what part of it you want to play. The words hung in the air, and Amara felt the weight of them settling over her, like a blanket she couldn't escape from. She didn't know how to respond. What part of this world was she supposed to accept? What part of it could she control? She had always been just a bystander, watching from the sidelines, but now it seemed like she was being pulled into the heart of it all. You don't have to do anything yet, Dominic continued, his voice softening. But the first step is to understand what you're dealing with. Your mother, her past, it's all a part of this. Amara felt her breath catch in her throat as she tried to absorb everything he was saying. Was there more to her mother than she had ever known? Was there a part of her mother's life that she had never been told about? How can I understand? Amara asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. How can I even begin to understand any of this? Dominic gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I'll help you, he said simply. But you have to be willing to face it. You have to be willing to let go of the idea that you're just a maid, that you're just a simple girl from a small town. Amara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Let go of the idea that she was just a maid? Let go of everything she had ever known? Was it really that easy? I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I don't know if I can face this world, face the truth about my mother, about myself. Dominic's gaze softened, and for a moment, he almost looked human, vulnerable even. You don't have to do it alone, he said. I'll help you. We can figure this out together. His words, unexpected and comforting, brought a sense of relief to Amara, but it was short-lived. She still had so many questions, so many uncertainties. Her mind was racing, and the weight of everything she had just learned was starting to sink in. But what if I don't want this? She asked, her voice small. What if I don't want any part of this world? I didn't ask for any of this. Dominic stepped closer to her, his expression intense. It's not about what you want, Amara. It's about what you need to understand. This world doesn't just go away. You can't erase your past, no matter how hard you try. But you can choose how you move forward. Amara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't know if she was ready for what Dominic was asking of her. But one thing was certain. Her life, her identity, everything she had ever known, was about to change. She wasn't sure if she could handle it, but she had no choice. The past was calling her, and she had to face it. Okay, she said finally, her voice steadying. I'll listen. I'll try to understand. Dominic gave her a small nod, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he were about to smile. Good, he said softly. That's the first step. Amara stood there for a moment, her mind still racing, but something had shifted inside her. She didn't know what the future held, or what role she would play in this world that had suddenly been thrust upon her. But one thing was clear, she couldn't go back. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning away from it. The only thing left to do was move forward, step into the unknown, and see where it led. Amara sat in her small room, the letter still in her hands, the weight of its contents pressing heavily on her chest. She had agreed to face the truth, to confront a past she never knew existed. But now, with Dominic's words echoing in her mind, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was to come. The world she had lived in, the quiet, simple life she had known, was slipping away, replaced by something darker, more complex. She stared at the letter again, her mother's handwriting still haunting her. It was a simple message, but the words carried so much weight, so much hidden meaning. The truth about our past is something you must find on your own. Her mother had kept secrets. But why? What had her mother been a part of? And how was she connected to Dominic's world? The questions piled up, unanswered, like a mountain she didn't know how to climb. Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She couldn't keep running. She had promised to understand, to learn, and now she had no choice but to follow through. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like there was no clear path forward. How could she step into a world so far removed from everything she knew? How could she trust Dominic, a man who held so many secrets of his own? The door to her room creaked open, and Amara looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway. His presence filled the space, as it always did, but today there was something different in his eyes. Something softer. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady but with an undertone of something deeper. Amara stood, her hands still trembling from the weight of the letter. She wasn't ready. How could she be? But she had made her choice. "I'm ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know what that meant, exactly, but she couldn't back down now. Dominic stepped aside, motioning for her to follow him. She hesitated for a moment before stepping into the hallway, the cold marble floors beneath her feet feeling like they were carrying her into an unknown future. "I know this isn't easy," Dominic said as they walked. "I know you have doubts, questions, but you need to understand that everything you're about to learn is part of who you are, and it's time for you to stop running." Amara didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. Her mind was still racing, trying to catch up with the reality of what she was walking into. They made their way down the grand hallway, past the opulent rooms she had grown so accustomed to cleaning. But today, it all felt different. The mansion no longer seemed like a place she belonged. It felt like a foreign world, a place where everything she had ever known was being turned upside down. They stopped in front of a large wooden door at the end of the hallway. Dominic paused, his hand resting on the handle. "This is where it begins," he said. "Behind this door is where you'll learn the truth. The whole truth." Amara took a deep breath. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. With a quick nod, she stepped forward, the door opening with a soft creak. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with shelves filled with old books and papers scattered across a large wooden desk. It looked like an office of sorts, but there was a heaviness to the air, as if it held memories of things long buried. Dominic gestured for her to sit at the desk. "You've always wondered about your mother's past," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "Well, now it's time to see it. Time to understand what she was really a part of." Amara sat down slowly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She couldn't take her eyes off the papers spread out before her. There were old photographs, faded documents, and a few items she didn't recognize. Dominic stood beside her, watching her closely as she picked up the first photograph. It was of a young woman, smiling, standing beside a man Amara didn't recognize. The man was dressed in a suit, his posture rigid, his face stern. "This is your mother," Dominic said softly. "And this is where it all began." Amara's hands shook as she looked at the photo, trying to piece together the unfamiliar faces. Her mother, so young, so full of life. But who was the man? Why had her mother been involved with him? "Who is he?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. "His name is Salvatore Romano," Dominic said, his tone darkening. "He was a key figure in the network your mother was a part of, and he was tied to my family." Amara's breath caught in her throat. Salvatore Romano? The name sounded so familiar, but she couldn't place it. "What do you mean, tied to your family?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic's gaze hardened. "My family, the Romano family, has been involved in this world for generations. Your mother, she was a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not." Amara stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up with the words. "My mother was part of your family's business?" she asked, her voice cracking. Dominic nodded. "She was." And she kept that part of her life hidden from you for a reason. It wasn't safe for you to know, Amara. But now, you need to understand what that world really is. Amara's head spun as the pieces began to fall into place. Her mother, a part of the Mafia? It was too much to process, too much to comprehend all at once. She had always thought her mother had been a simple woman, working hard to give her a good life. But now, it seemed there was so much more. So what does this mean for me? Amara asked, her voice small. Dominic's eyes softened. It means you're part of this, whether you like it or not. But you don't have to let it define you. You can choose how to live your life. But first, you have to understand where you come from. Amara took a deep breath. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep living in the dark. The truth was out there, and she was ready to face it. Amara sat silently in the dimly lit room, the documents in front of her a blur as her mind raced to process everything Dominic had just revealed. She had always thought she knew who her mother was, the kind, hard-working woman who had raised her with love and care. But now, standing at the precipice of a truth she had never imagined, Amara felt the foundation of her entire life cracking beneath her. She had always avoided asking questions about her mother's past, thinking it was better to leave certain things unspoken. But now, with Dominic's words echoing in her head, the questions she had once pushed aside seemed impossible to ignore. Your mother was a part of this world, Dominic had said. A part of my family's world. The weight of those words pressed heavily on her chest. How could her mother, the woman who had given her a life full of simple joys, have been involved with a world so dark, so dangerous? What had she hidden from Amara, and why? I need you to understand this, Amara. Dominic's voice interrupted her thoughts, drawing her back into the present. Your mother made choices. She didn't want you to be part of this life. She kept you away from it. Amara's eyes flicked to Dominic, her mind still processing the enormity of the situation. She didn't want to believe it, but everything was pointing in the direction of a truth she wasn't ready to accept. Her mother, a part of the Mafia? The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine. But why didn't she ever tell me? Amara asked, her voice breaking. Why did she keep it all from me? Dominic stepped closer to her, his presence almost overwhelming. Because she wanted to protect you, he said softly, his gaze intense. She thought that by keeping you away from this world, she could keep you safe. But the truth always comes out, Amara. And now, it's time for you to face it. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as Amara struggled to come to terms with the revelations. She had always believed in the simplicity of her life, in the idea that she was just another woman, working a job, staying out of trouble. But now, everything she had known seemed to be unraveling. What does this mean for me? Amara whispered, the words barely audible. What am I supposed to do with all of this? Dominic's gaze softened, but there was no mistaking the determination in his eyes. You need to make a choice, he said, his voice steady. You need to decide what kind of life you want to live. You can't run from the truth, Amara. But you don't have to be defined by it, either. Amara's heart raced as she processed his words. What choice did she have? She was already knee-deep in this world, whether she liked it or not. Her mother's past was a part of her now, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. But the idea of stepping into the life Dominic was offering, a life full of danger and shadows, made her stomach turn. She had always been content in the background, invisible, doing her job, and staying out of sight. But now, she was being asked to take a step into a world that terrified her. I don't know if I can do this, Amara said, her voice shaking. I don't know if I can be a part of this. Dominic looked at her with a mixture of understanding and resolve. You don't have to be a part of everything, he said, but you need to understand the power of choice. You have more control over your life than you think. You can make your own path. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. She had always been in control of her own destiny, or so she had thought. But now, she was faced with a choice she wasn't ready to make. What happens if I say no? She asked, her voice small. Dominic's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. Then you walk away, he said. But walking away doesn't mean forgetting. The truth will follow you wherever you go, Amara. She opened her eyes and met his gaze, searching for some kind of answer, some kind of clarity. But all she saw was a man who had lived a life she couldn't even begin to understand. A life full of power, danger, and choices that had shaped him into someone she couldn't fully trust. "What if I choose to stay?" she asked quietly. Dominic paused, considering her words. "Then you'll have to face everything," he said. "But you won't be alone. I'll be here to help you, Amara. We'll face this together." His words were a strange comfort, but they also filled her with unease. She wasn't sure what was worse, the idea of stepping into this world or the thought of walking away and leaving everything behind. There was no easy answer, no simple solution. But one thing was clear: her life was no longer just her own. She was tied to a past she didn't fully understand, and now she had to decide how to move forward. "I don't know what this means for me," Amara said, her voice trembling. "But I'm willing to try." Dominic nodded, his expression softening. "That's all I can ask for," he said quietly. "The rest will come with time." Amara stood there for a moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had made the first step. The past was behind her, but it was shaping her future in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. All she could do now was face it, step by step, and see where it would lead. Amara sat at the table, her hands trembling as she looked over the documents laid out before her. The room, once a place of comfort and quiet, now felt like a cage. Dominic's words still echoed in her mind. "You can make your own path." But how could she? Everything she had known about her mother's past, about her own life, was being turned upside down. What did it all mean? How much of her mother's secrets were intertwined with Dominic's world? Her thoughts were chaotic, and the heavy silence in the room didn't help. She could hear the faint rustling of the papers as her fingers slowly traced over the documents, each one revealing a new layer of information about the life her mother had kept hidden. Dominic had promised to help her understand, but the deeper she delved, the more questions arose. She had known her mother as a loving, quiet woman who had worked hard to give her a stable life. But now, it was clear that there had been more to her mother than Amara had ever realized. Was her mother involved in more than just the Mafia's business? Had she been a part of something much bigger, something that even now threatened to pull Amara into its grasp? The room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pressing in as she sifted through the documents. Each paper seemed like a clue, but the puzzle was still incomplete. She needed answers, but she wasn't sure where to find them. "You're staring at those papers like they hold the answers to everything." Dominic's voice interrupted her thoughts. Amara looked up, meeting his gaze. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with a look that was both patient and calculating. He had always been a man of few words, but his presence was enough to command attention. "I don't understand any of this," Amara said, her voice thick with frustration. "My mother, she was part of all this? She was involved in your world?" Dominic nodded, stepping further into the room. "Yes, but it's not what you think. She was part of the family, but not in the way you're imagining. Your mother was a protector, Amara. She was part of something much bigger, and she did everything she could to keep you away from it." Amara felt a surge of confusion. "A protector?" she repeated. "What do you mean?" Dominic took a deep breath and walked closer, sitting down across from her. His expression softened, and for the first time, Amara saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "Your mother was a key figure in my family's operation. She worked with us, but her role was different from the others. She was there to keep things from going too far, to make sure things stayed under control. She was an anchor in a world that's anything but stable." Amara's mind struggled to catch up. Her mother, a key figure? The words felt foreign to her, like they belonged to someone else's life, not her own. "But why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she ever explain any of this to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he thought about her question. "Because she wanted to protect you," he said quietly. "She wanted you to have a chance at a normal life, away from all of this. She knew that once you were pulled in, there would be no going back. She kept her distance from the darker parts of our world, but she couldn't keep you from it forever." Amara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had always known that her mother had sacrificed for her, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "So what now?" Amara asked, her voice shaking. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense. "Now, you learn who you really are," he said, his voice steady. "You can choose to walk away, or you can choose to embrace your past. But no matter what, you can't ignore it." Amara's heart pounded in her chest as his words sank in. I don't know if I can do this, she said softly. I don't know if I can live in this world. I've always just been a maid, doing my job, staying out of the way. But now it feels like everything is changing, like I'm being dragged into something I don't understand. Dominic reached across the table, his hand resting on top of hers. The warmth of his touch was unexpected, grounding. You don't have to do this alone, he said. You've always had a choice, Amara. You still do. But you have to make it for yourself, not for anyone else. Amara looked up at him, her chest tight with emotion. She had always felt like she was playing a part in someone else's story, never truly understanding where she fit. But now, with Dominic's words weighing on her, she realized that she was at a crossroads. She could continue living in the shadows, pretending that the truth didn't matter, or she could face the past head-on and take control of her future. I don't know where to start, she whispered. How do I even begin to understand all of this? Dominic gave her a small smile, the first genuine one she had seen in what felt like forever. Start with the truth, Amara, he said. That's all anyone can do. And once you accept it, everything else will fall into place. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was finally making a choice that was truly hers. She could no longer hide from her past. It was time to face it, no matter how difficult or painful it might be. I'm ready, she said quietly. I'm ready to understand. Dominic nodded, his expression resolute. Then let's begin. Amara stood before the large, ornate mirror in her room, staring at her reflection. For the first time, she saw herself differently. The weight of everything she had learned, the truth about her mother, about her connection to Dominic's world, settled heavily on her shoulders. Her mother's past, once a mystery she had never dared to uncover, was now a part of her own story. Amara had always considered herself an outsider, someone who watched life unfold from the edges, never truly a part of anything. But now, standing on the precipice of a world she didn't understand, she realized that her life was no longer her own. She was tied to a past that was too deep, too complicated to ignore. And Dominic was right. She could no longer hide from it. I've come this far, she whispered to herself, her voice a little shaky. I can't turn back now. Her fingers brushed the edge of the letter again, feeling the crinkled paper beneath her touch. It had been a message from her mother, a final confession of sorts, revealing the ties that bound them to a world far darker than Amara had ever known. Her mother had been part of something bigger, something dangerous. And now, Amara had no choice but to step into that world. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Dominic standing in the doorway. His presence filled the room, as it always did. But today, there was a different energy about him, one that seemed to carry the weight of the past they were both confronting. Are you ready? He asked, his voice steady but with a hint of something softer beneath the surface. Amara swallowed hard. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted, her voice small. But I can't keep running from this. I have to understand what all of this means. Dominic gave her a small nod, stepping into the room. That's all I can ask, he said. Understanding is the first step. The rest will follow. He held out his hand, offering her a gesture of solidarity, a silent promise that she wasn't alone in this. Amara hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. It was strange, this moment. She had never thought she would be standing here, stepping into this world, but somehow, it felt inevitable. What happens next? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's grip on her hand tightened, not in a possessive way, but in a way that felt protective. Next, you learn the truth, he said quietly. The whole truth. About your mother, about everything she was involved in. Amara nodded, her mind still struggling to make sense of everything. She had always thought her mother was just a simple woman, living a quiet life. But now, she was learning that nothing about her life was simple, and the layers of secrecy that had surrounded her were far deeper than she had ever imagined. What if I don't like what I find? Amara asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady. It's not about liking it, Amara, he said. It's about accepting it. The truth doesn't always come wrapped in a way we want to receive it. But it's the truth, and that's what matters. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. The truth. She had always known there were things her mother had kept from her, but this was more than she had ever expected. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice steadying. Dominic's expression softened, and he gestured for her to follow him. "We start with the past," he said. "With the people your mother was involved with. The people who shaped her, and in turn, shaped you." Amara followed him out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the grand hallway. It felt surreal, walking alongside Dominic, heading into a world she had never known, but now was being forced to face. They walked through the mansion, past the grand rooms she had spent so much time in, the rooms she had cleaned, but never truly entered. The wealth, the luxury, it all seemed so far removed from the life she had grown up with. "This world," Amara whispered, more to herself than to Dominic. "It's so far from what I knew." Dominic glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It's not a world for everyone," he said quietly, "but it's the world you're connected to. And now, you need to know what that means." Amara nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't sure she was ready for what came next, but she was determined to face it. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, a door that Amara had never seen open before. It was old, the wood worn, and the brass handle glinted in the low light. Dominic paused in front of it, turning to her. "This is where the story begins," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the door. She wasn't sure what she would find, but she knew one thing for certain. Once she walked through that door, there would be no going back. She turned the handle, and the door creaked open. Inside was a small study, filled with old books and papers scattered across a large desk. The air was thick with dust, but the room had an air of importance, as if it had been untouched for years. Dominic stepped inside first, his presence filling the space. "This is where everything started," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is where your mother's story truly begins." Amara stepped in behind him, her mind racing. What was she about to uncover? What secrets lay hidden in this room? And how would they change everything she thought she knew about herself? Amara stood just inside the study, the air thick with dust and memory, as Dominic closed the door behind them. The sound felt final, like the sealing of a chapter that had been waiting years to be opened. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with old ledgers, journals, and framed photographs that had faded with time. A single desk lamp cast a warm glow over the surface of the desk, illuminating stacks of neatly organized folders. This room did not feel like part of a mansion built for power and display. It felt private, human. Amara took a slow step forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the desk as if she needed the physical contact to stay grounded. Dominic remained silent, allowing the space to speak for itself. Finally, he reached into one of the drawers and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. Its cover was worn, the edges softened from years of handling. He placed it gently on the desk in front of her. Amara's breath caught. She recognized it instantly. She had seen it once before, years ago, tucked away in a box beneath her mother's bed, always hidden, always off limits. She had been a child then, curious, reaching for it, only for her mother to gently take her hand and say it was not time. Amara stared at the notebook now, her chest tightening. "That belonged to her," she said softly, her voice unsteady. Dominic nodded. "She gave it to me the day she decided to disappear from this world," he said. "She asked me to keep it safe. She said one day, if you were ready, I would give it back to you." Amara's hands trembled as she picked it up. The leather was cool beneath her fingers, familiar in a way that made her throat ache. "Why you?" she asked. "Why did she trust you with this?" Dominic exhaled slowly, as if preparing himself. "Because your mother saved my life," he said quietly. The words landed softly, but their impact was immense. Amara looked up at him, stunned. Dominic did not look away. "Long before I became the man you know," he continued, "I was reckless, angry. I believed power was the only thing that mattered. Your mother was the one who stood in my way, not with force, with courage, with principle." Amara swallowed hard. This version of her mother did not match the woman she remembered, cooking simple meals, working long hours, humming softly while folding laundry. And yet, something inside her recognized it. She believed in restraint, Dominic said, in limits, in protecting those who had no voice. That tattoo you recognized was not a mark of ownership or loyalty. It was a reminder, a symbol of a promise she made to herself, to never lose her humanity. Tears blurred Amara's vision as she opened the notebook. Inside were handwritten entries, dates, reflections, and quiet observations. Her mother's voice seemed to rise from the pages, calm and steady, filled with concern for the future, for choices made and avoided. Dominic watched as Amara read, giving her space. She stayed as long as she could, he said gently. But when she learned she was going to have you, everything changed. She knew she had to leave. Not out of fear, out of love. Amara pressed a hand to her mouth, emotion overwhelming her. She never abandoned anything, Dominic continued. She sacrificed everything. Her influence, her protection, her place. Also, you could grow up free from this world. Amara looked up, tears slipping down her cheeks. And you let her go? Dominic nodded. I owed her that. More than that, I respected her. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Silence settled between them, not heavy, but reverent. Amara closed the notebook carefully, holding it to her chest. For the first time, the confusion inside her began to organize itself into understanding. Her mother had not lived a double life. She had lived a purposeful one. So what does this mean now? Amara asked quietly. Dominic met her gaze, his expression steady, sincere. It means you were never meant to be small, he said. But you were meant to be free. I will never force you into my world. Your mother made sure of that. But if you choose to stay, it will be on your terms. Amara breathed deeply, feeling something shift within her. Not fear, not obligation. Clarity. She looked once more around the room, then back at Dominic. I do not want power, she said. I do not want control. Dominic nodded. That is exactly why you deserve respect, he replied. Amara straightened, holding her mother's notebook firmly. She did not know what the future would bring, but for the first time, she knew who she came from. And that knowledge did not weigh her down. It lifted her up. Amara sat on the edge of the desk, her fingers still gripping the leather-bound notebook, her heart beating with a strange combination of fear and resolve. The room felt different now, quieter, as though it held its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. She had read through the notebook, each page revealing a little more of her mother's secret life, the life that had been kept hidden from her for so long. The weight of the truth was settling in, but she could feel something else too, a spark of understanding. Her mother, the woman she had always known, had been so much more. She wasn't just a mother, a caregiver, or a housekeeper. She had been a protector, a guardian of sorts, someone who had lived a life of sacrifice and decisions that were beyond Amara's comprehension until now. And in that moment, Amara realized something else. Her mother's story was now hers. Her mother's past was a part of her present, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. Dominic's presence in the room was a steady force, unspoken but felt. He had been watching her closely, his expression unreadable, but she could sense his quiet understanding. You've learned a lot, he said, breaking the silence. Amara glanced up at him, her voice quiet but firm. I didn't know this part of her, she whispered, the words heavy with emotion. Dominic nodded slowly. None of us really know everything about our loved ones, he said. But now you do, and now you have to decide what to do with it. Amara's mind was swirling with questions. What was her next step? What did it mean to be a part of this world now that she understood her mother's place in it? She had always thought she knew who she was, but now, everything felt different. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she admitted, the uncertainty clear in her voice. This world, it's so far from anything I've ever known. Dominic walked over to the window, his silhouette framed by the soft light filtering in from the evening sky. He didn't look at her as he spoke, but his words carried weight. This world isn't easy, he said, and it's not a place everyone chooses to stay in. But once you understand it, once you accept your place in it, it becomes a part of you. Your mother knew that. She made her choice, and she did what she thought was best for you. Amara sat in silence, absorbing his words. Her mother had chosen to leave this world behind, but her choice to protect Amara had woven their lives into it, whether Amara liked it or not. And now, Amara had a choice too. She could continue to live in ignorance, hiding from the truth, or she could embrace what was unfolding in front of her. She could step into the unknown, armed with the knowledge her mother had left behind. But even as she thought about it, a part of her hesitated. Could she really live in this world? Could she be a part of something so far removed from the life she had always imagined for herself? Dominic turned back to face her, his gaze intense, but not unkind. I won't lie to you, Amara. The choice you make will define you, he said. It will shape your future, whether you decide to leave or to stay. But you can't undo the truth. It's a part of you now, and you can't walk away from it. Amara closed her eyes, trying to steady her thoughts. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Everything felt so overwhelming. She had spent her life trying to stay unnoticed, to remain a part of the background, but now she was being thrust into the center of a world she didn't understand. She wanted to run, to go back to the life she had known, but deep down, she knew that wouldn't be possible. Her mother's legacy, her choices, they had already set the path before her. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I don't know if I can be a part of this. Dominic's expression softened, and he stepped closer to her. I know, he said gently, but you're stronger than you think. Your mother was strong, and you carry that strength with you. The world you're facing may seem impossible, but it's your world now, and I'll be here to help you navigate it. You don't have to do it alone. Amara felt a flicker of hope spark inside her. She had never thought she would find herself here, standing on the edge of a new life, surrounded by so many unknowns. But Dominic's words, the quiet certainty in his voice, gave her something to hold on to. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached his eyes. Now, you learn to navigate it, he said. You learn what it means to be a part of this world, and you make it your own. Amara nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a sense of agency. A sense that she wasn't just a passenger in her own life. She had a role to play, and she would figure out how to step into it. The truth had come to her, and it had changed everything. But it didn't have to define her future. That was still hers to decide. As the evening drew in and the last light of the day faded from the room, Amara felt a quiet sense of determination settle within her. She had her mother's strength, her courage, and now it was time to use it. Amara sat in the grand dining room, the soft glow of candlelight casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. The room was quiet, too quiet, as if the entire house were holding its breath, waiting for her next move. The last few days had been a whirlwind. Her mother's past, the truth about Dominic's world, everything she had learned had settled into her consciousness like a storm. But now, sitting in this room, with everything still swirling in her mind, Amara felt an unfamiliar calm. She had made her decision. She was no longer the person she had been. The old life she had clung to, one of simplicity, of working in the shadows, was slipping away, replaced by something new, something she couldn't yet fully grasp. Dominic had told her she could choose her path. He had shown her the way, but the choice was still hers to make. What do you see in this world? Amara asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but beneath it was a hint of the uncertainty that still lingered. Dominic, who had been watching her quietly from across the room, raised an eyebrow. I see power, he said, his voice low but firm. I see control, the ability to shape things, to influence outcomes. But it's a double-edged sword. With power comes responsibility. With control comes sacrifice. Amara nodded slowly. She had heard the words before, but now they carried a weight she hadn't fully understood until now. Power, control, sacrifice. These were the things Dominic had lived with for as long as she had known him. And yet, even now, there was a distance in his eyes, something that suggested he had never truly accepted the cost of it all. She could feel the pull of that same darkness, the allure of influence, the temptation to step into a world where she could make things happen, where her voice could be heard. But at what cost? Do you ever regret it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, Amara saw a flicker of vulnerability in them. Sometimes, he said quietly, but regret doesn't change the past. It only holds you back. I've made my choices, and I've accepted the consequences. Amara sat back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. The conversation felt heavier now, as if they were both admitting things that neither of them were truly prepared to say aloud. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. Dominic's gaze met hers, and for a moment, he didn't speak. He only watched her, as if weighing something in his mind. I want you to understand, he said finally. I want you to know that you don't have to become what I've become. You don't have to make the same choices I've made. But I do want you to know what it means to be a part of this world. To see the truth, not just the power. Amara's heart raced at his words. What was he really offering her? A place in his world? A chance to learn? To become someone else? She didn't know. She didn't know if she wanted any of it. But she couldn't deny the pull, the temptation to step into a life of purpose, of action. For so long, she had lived in the background, content to be unnoticed, to let others shape her future. But now, the future was in her hands, and she had to decide what she wanted it to be. And if I choose to walk away? Amara asked, her voice soft but unwavering. Dominic's eyes flickered with something unreadable, and for a moment, he didn't answer. But then, he leaned forward, his expression serious. You can choose to walk away, he said quietly. But know this, you can never truly escape what you are. What you're a part of. You can hide from it, run from it, but it will always find you. And one day, you'll have to face it. The sooner you face it, the sooner you can make your own choices, without running. Amara's mind spun as she processed his words. Could she really walk away? Could she leave behind this world, this life that was calling to her? Or was it too late for that? Was she already too deep in, too connected to this world to turn back? What if I don't want any part of it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's eyes softened, but there was a quiet strength in his voice as he spoke. You don't have to want it, but you're already a part of it. The only question now is whether you embrace it or let it consume you. The silence stretched between them as Amara sat there, her mind racing. The future, her future, was unfolding before her, and she had no idea where it would lead. But she knew one thing. She couldn't stay in the dark any longer. She had to choose. She had to face the truth, even if it scared her. I don't know if I'm ready, she said quietly, her voice trembling. But I can't keep running. Dominic nodded, his gaze steady and understanding. Then take the first step, he said softly. Face the truth, and make it your own. Amara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the next step would be, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to hide. The truth was hers now, and it was time to face it.